Have you heard a view, an opinion, or a mistaken belief about your child's ability that is incorrect? Perhaps you're raising a young person living with autism, ADHD, or another neurodiverse condition, a medical or a physical condition, and you are trying to highlight the challenges or difficulties that your child is presenting, and you also recognise that they would benefit from additional support. However, misconceptions have delayed or hindered the chances of your child accessing an assessment or specialist support. So if you're watching this channel, it is most likely that your focus is to support your child to access what they need to pursue their education. So in this case, why is it important to debunk misconceptions? Whether that's to support your child to access an EHCP assessment, or to find a suitable school, or even to access the right specialist support and therapies. So my name is Brenda and I'm a parent mentor and a fellow parent, and I support parents raising children with individual needs to stay empowered whilst they navigate through procedural challenges. And I have personally observed how misconceptions play out and how they can have a negative impact on a child's progress. So in this video, I'm going to highlight 5 misconceptions to allow us parents to be more mindful when navigating this current education system. And the first misconception is their need is too little, and this is simply not true. So earlier on in my experience, I heard a communication to state that my child's needs were too little for him to access support from a speech and language therapist. They felt that he was able to string a sentence. This blanket statement wrongly assumed that my son's social and communication skills were on par. And this was a contradiction, despite the school expressing that they were concerned about the level of his communication and his social interactions, as well as his abilities to interact within the classroom. These misconceptions occur when a child is not disruptive or they are achieving well in a particular subject. Therefore, they are not deemed as a problem and their underlying anxieties or struggles are overlooked. Whereas you as a parent recognise that they perhaps may not be sleeping before an exam or feeling the pressure to maintain a facade, especially within a competitive learning environment, or that they don't want to stand out or be a target to bullying. In the UK, legislation framework requires that a child's needs are met, and legislation is currently fit for purpose when implemented properly. The law states that an assessment for an EHCP must be issued where necessary, or that you make the decision to just liaise with the necessary professionals to ensure that your child's needs are met. So it's really important to recognise those biases that are made towards your child rather than focusing on their developmental learning. The second misconception is that their need is too great. Once again, this is clearly not true, because some children's individual differences have a mild impact on their life, and others, their individual differences may have a significant impact. So if a child has an individual need that shows up as a barrier for them to engage in their learning, you would expect that their support would be identified as specialist. Therefore, the most suitable support should be put in place wherever that child wishes to experience their learning. But when this misconception is used as a reason not to provide support, things can lead down a rabbit hole, leading to perhaps exclusion or your child being sent to an alternative provision. So children with individual needs may have different needs and different levels of support, but that doesn't mean that they are less eligible than another individual that requires more support. Another misconception is that their behaviour is done intentionally to retaliate others. Again, this is not true. Children with special educational needs will struggle to manage their environment, hence the reason for their educational needs to be met. But what you might find is that the focus is on a child misbehaving rather than identifying the cause for their behaviour, where the emphasis is on the school's behaviour policy not being met and a child needing to be a certain way before they are taught. So in my experience, when my son was at school, they made the abrupt decision that they will not meet his needs, despite him having a diagnosis, an EHCP, and being in that school for many years prior. And the reason was because they decided that his needs were too great. and they felt that my son's destiny was to continue his education somewhere else other than at his current school. So in my experience, I have had those letters that you take home. Nowadays it might be on an electronic portal of some kind, and as I read them, the focus was primarily on his behaviour rather than supporting him. This created contradictions that did not align with the school's quality policies or government guidelines. It is important to remember that every child is unique and should be treated as an individual. So unfortunately, where a child is either labelled as naughty, it may only take a diagnosis to have their skills and abilities acknowledged. A diagnosis can provide a framework to understand something about a person, but the problem is what happens when a child is not in receipt of one. But on the other hand, labels can be used to stigmatise or used to discriminate against a child. But the goal is for a child to understand the way that they function so that they are equipped to self-advocate. So in the interim, this is where we as parents need to step in rather than supporting a reason to not provide support. And the fourth misconception is there is a gender difference. There is a misconception that children in receipt of special educational needs support are boys, and this is simply not true. The characteristics for a female present differently to those of a male. There is a diverse representation of both genders living with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, PDA, and many think that a typical autistic person is a boy, as they are deemed as overly disruptive, or that they like activities that are deemed as more masculine, for example. While many assessments are carried out on boys, the voices of girls are underrepresented. Despite this being an old age concern, things are changing as the National Autistic Society statistics have recorded an increase, and hopefully this narrative will disappear over time. And the fifth misconception is constantly showing up as requiring a need. This is where expectation is for a child to be good, to be on par, that they may excel on maths or English or science, and this needs to continue in their other abilities such as their social and communication. So there's an expectation for them to be equally as good as what they are in all the other subjects, and this applies for their behaviour as well, for them to behave in a certain way with a particular teacher or in a particular room as they would in any other room or with all the other teachers. For a young person living with perhaps autism, staying consistent can be very challenging for many reasons. Comments that don't help, such as quite they're less autistic or they're more autistic, or oh, I can do that as well, is a very limited way of thinking, as it creates unconscious bias towards a child's progress, where there is a unintended preference for how others believe a child should show up. The pressure and confusion for a child to consistently show up where they hide their difficulties is unfair. This would suppress their learning potential and enable them to underachieve or gain a lack of confidence in their ability to keep up with the expectation of others. This mistaken belief and creating gaps in a child's learning, which defeats the purpose of special educational needs support. Debunking these misconceptions will help our children from having to overcompensate where their needs are not met, and carrying out behaviours such as masking and miscommunication, and miscommunicating their challenges as a way to survive rather than thrive. So feel free to share in the comment section whether you've experienced some misconceptions, and I'd love to hear about your experience. And if you're looking for insight on ways to stay empowered, why not take a look at some of my other videos, or contact me using the information in the description box below. But for now, keep doing what you're doing, stay focused, stay empowered, and keep creating progress. Thank you for listening.